Breaking right now. Emergency crews are digging through twisted concrete and shattered glass in East Tehran after a massive U.S. Israeli strike flattened a residential building. Dust hangs in the air as rescuers pull out personal belongings, photos, toys, even a child's shoe, from the rubble. State television shows coffins draped in Iranian flags rolling through central streets, mourners waving portraits and banners shouting vengeance. Among the dead, Ali Larijani, Iran's national security chief, Gholamreza Soleimani of the Basij, and 84 sailors from the frigate Iris Dina. Iranian officials say the strikes killed senior figures, while the U.S. claims it hit coastal missile sites to protect shipping lanes near the Strait of Hormuz. What if this funeral becomes the spark that pushes BRICS nations further away from the dollar? Stay with me. The implications for global markets, crypto, and oil are huge. Now here's the key point. Rescue workers say they are still searching for survivors under the collapsed slab in the Resalat district. The Iranian Red Crescent reports that emergency teams have recovered dozens of bodies and are treating the wounded in makeshift clinics. Local residents describe hearing a deafening blast before dawn, followed by a rain of debris that turned streets into chaos. According to eyewitnesses interviewed by Iranian state media, the attack came without warning, shaking windows kilometers away. But something important happens here. Iran's leadership has called the strike a war crime, vowing retaliation against the United States and Israel. IRGC commanders appeared at the funeral, promising a crushing response that could target U.S. bases across the region. Analysts suggest the funeral's massive turnout signals a surge in nationalist sentiment that may harden Iran's stance in ongoing negotiations. And this is where things change. Oil markets reacted instantly, with Brent crude spiking over 3% as traders fear a wider Gulf conflict. Shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz face heightened risk, prompting some tankers to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. Meanwhile, Bitcoin and Ethereum saw sharp intraday moves, reflecting crypto's role as a hedge amid geopolitical turmoil. According to Bloomberg, crypto inflows rose as investors sought assets less tied to traditional finance. But the real story may be unfolding in BRICS capitals. Russia and China have reportedly begun discussing a joint initiative to settle trade in local currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. If Iran's grief fuels a push for de-dollarization, the ripple effects could reshape global finance for years. Now let's look at the human toll. Rescue teams say they have pulled out over 20 survivors so far, though many remain trapped beneath unstable concrete. The Iranian Red Crescent warns that the death toll could rise as more bodies are recovered from the debris. Hospitals in Tehran are overwhelmed, with doctors treating burns, shrapnel wounds, and trauma from the blast. International aid groups have requested access, but security restrictions remain tight amid the ongoing strikes. Despite the chaos, Tehran's residents have shown remarkable solidarity, lining the streets to honor the fallen. According to observers, the funeral procession stretched for miles, reflecting a rare moment of national unity. But what if this tragedy accelerates a broader shift? Some economists argue that the conflict could push Gulf states to diversify their reserves away from U.S. treasuries. If Saudi Arabia and the UAE follow Iran's lead in seeking alternative settlement mechanisms, demand for the dollar might weaken. CoinDesk reports that crypto trading volumes in the Middle East have jumped, suggesting locals are already exploring digital alternatives. Yet the U.S. maintains its strikes were precise, targeting only military infrastructure linked to missile launches. Pentagon spokespersons say they regret any civilian loss and insist the actions were necessary to protect international shipping. Still, images of rubble and grieving families dominate Iranian airwaves, fueling narratives of foreign aggression. Now, here's the key point. Analysts at Eurasia Group warn that a prolonged confrontation could disrupt global supply chains, especially for petrochemicals and rare metals used in tech manufacturing. If the Strait of Hormuz sees repeated closures, insurance premiums for vessels could climb, raising costs for everything from plastics to pharmaceuticals. Meanwhile, central banks are watching closely. The Federal Reserve has noted that geopolitical risk premiums are already influencing market volatility. Some policymakers fear that a sustained spike in oil prices could reignite inflation worries worldwide. But the human story remains front and center. Mourners at the funeral spoke of loss, anger, and a desire for justice that could shape Iran's policy for months to come. And this is where things change. As the sun set over Tehran, the funerals concluded with chants of "Death to America" and "Death to Israel," echoed by thousands in the square. IRGC leaders warned that any further aggression would be met with a response that could engulf the region. Yet amid the sorrow, there were also calls for restraint from some elders, urging the leadership to avoid a wider war that could devastate civilians. According to Persian Gulf analysts, the coming days will test whether Iran channels its grief into diplomatic moves or military escalation. If the latter, markets could see another shockwave, driving oil higher and prompting investors to seek safe havens like gold and crypto. If the former, we might see a push for negotiated de-escalation, potentially easing tensions and stabilizing prices. Now let's consider the broader implications for de-dollarization. BRICS nations have been exploring alternatives to the dollar for years, but recent events may accelerate those plans. Russia's finance minister hinted at a new settlement system that could involve a basket of local currencies and gold-backed instruments. China's central bank has reportedly increased its bilateral swap lines with allied states, aiming to reduce reliance on greenbacks. If Iran's tragedy becomes a rallying cry, we could see faster adoption of these mechanisms across the global south. Such a shift would not happen overnight, but the psychological impact of witnessing a sovereign's leaders laid to rest after foreign strikes can be powerful. Investors are already watching for signs that central banks might diversify reserves, which could weaken the dollar's long-term dominance. And this is where things change. Crypto markets, often sensitive to geopolitical risk, showed heightened activity as traders reacted to the news. Bitcoin briefly touched a new high as some investors framed it as digital gold amid fears of fiat currency turbulence. Ethereum's network saw increased gas fees, reflecting heightened activity on decentralized finance platforms. Yet experts caution that crypto remains volatile, and any sustained rally would need clearer macroeconomic cues. According to CoinShares, institutional inflows into crypto funds have risen modestly, suggesting cautious interest rather than panic-driven buying. Still, the narrative of a weakening dollar and rising alternative assets is gaining traction in trading circles worldwide. Now here's the key point. The human cost of this conflict cannot be reduced to market moves. Families in Tehran are grieving loved ones lost in an instant, their lives forever altered by the blast. Aid workers say they need safe passage to deliver medicine, food, and shelter to those displaced by the strikes. International organizations have appealed for a ceasefire to allow humanitarian access, but diplomatic channels remain strained. As the world watches, the fate of Tehran's streets, and perhaps the future of global finance, hangs in the balance. What happens next could shape not only the Middle East, but also the very architecture of how we trade, invest, and protect value across borders. Stay with me. The story is still unfolding, and the stakes are truly massive.